We've all watched leaders copy an established leadership style slightly blindly into a new culture or context and then had to watch it fail. But going too far the other way and constantly reshaping yourself to fit your environment isn't leadership either. It can feel inauthentic and be confusing to others, often failing to provide the structure that people are actually seeking. So how can leaders adapt across cultures and contexts without diluting who they are? Helen Olds joins me in this episode to explore exactly this balance. Welcome to the Independent School Podcast with me, Juliet Corbett. I'm a trusted advisor, executive coach and strategist, working with accomplished leaders who are navigating complex challenges, the kind that can feel like a tangled ball of string, confusing, frustrating, and hard to unpick. In this new series, I bring you real-world conversations with principals, heads, and CEOs of independent and international schools. Together, we explore problem-solving in uncertainty, staying strategic amidst the daily bustle of leadership, and building high-performing teams. Today, I'm joined by Helen Olds, Director of the British International School Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. She's got more than 20 years of leadership experience across international schools in Asia and the Middle East. Helen has led across a wide range of contexts, including startup and established schools, for-profit and not-for-profit models, and with students aged 3 to 18. She's worked with multiple curricula, including the English National Curriculum, IGCSEs, A-levels, and the IB Diploma. And she brings a deeply thoughtful and people-centred perspective to leadership in international education. Alongside her school leadership role, Helen is also Vice Chair of the British Schools in the Middle East, BSME, and an Executive Board Member of the Association of British Schools Overseas. She also collaborates and works with organisations including COBISS, HMC, and CIS. In this conversation, we explore how leadership needs to adapt across different cultures and contexts without losing authenticity. And we also talk about the balance between structure and freedom, the role of values and purpose in guiding decision-making, and how leaders can create the conditions for learning, growth, and creativity in a complex school environment. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Helen Olds. Hello, Helen, and welcome to the Independent School Podcast. Fantastic to have you here with us today.
Well, thank you very much. I feel very honoured that you've invited me to have the conversation today and looking forward to chatting to you.
Yeah, me too. So to start us off, what I'm always fascinated to hear about is the root of people's passion for education. A lot of people, when they go into this, they forge a career, a lifelong career, or at least a lifelong connection to education. And there must have been a moment or an event that kickstarted this journey for you. What is that root of that passion for why you're doing this job?
It's really interesting because a lot of people I find fall into education. They weren't sure what to do and they try something out. Whereas for me, it was the other way around. I always knew that I wanted to go into education and I didn't really actively explore anything else. And I went when I was at university between my second and third year to the USA on an internship. And I worked in an outdoor and an environmental education centre for a year. And that just solidified for me that this was my vocation. So I came back, finished my degree, completed my PGCE and went into schools. And I didn't really have a plan at that point. I knew following my year in the USA that I loved travelling. And I knew that education was my vocation. And I didn't have a structured plan that I want to be a head teacher or I want to be a head of department or I want to be a deputy. It wasn't like that. I love geography. It was my subject. And the reason I love that is because it pulls so many different fields together. And I think in the complicated world that we live in these days, something that pulls all of those things together and supports that problem solving process was really important to me. And so went into schools. And I think when you see people around you and you think, well, maybe I could have a go at that. Actually, I think I do have the skill set to be able to do that and have something to offer. And before I knew what had happened, I ended up running schools and really enjoying that process. And so here I am. So it was really the opportunity to combine my passion and to be able to travel. And like many international educators, I thought, I'm going to go overseas for a couple of years, have a bit of an adventure. But what I found is that I love that intercultural aspect, whereas working with people across a multitude of different nationalities. And that was really enriching for me and really enriching for the educational process. And so I developed a real skill set then of working cross cultures internationally and across a range of different countries and administrative systems. And so here I am today.
Fantastic. I love that there's that combination of the vocation for the teaching, the combination with the travel, and that obviously fits into an international schools career. And then the sense of the geography being the way that you pull together the strands from all these different subjects and weave them together in a way that helps us make sense and problem solve in the world. There's something that's really powerful about that, that's far beyond just your geography teaching, but maybe the way that you approach leadership. You're pulling together strands from different parts of the school, different parts of the culture to problem solve together. Do you think that's deep in you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, probably why I went to study geography at university was very much that grounded in, came from a farming family, and that connection with nature and that passion for the environment. I came from Cornwall, so I was by the sea. I really loved the underwater world. And so I think that pulled it all of that together. And I think that's where my sort of love of geography came from. But then people right from the outset, when I was starting to look at universities for geography, whether you're a physical geographer or a human geographer, no, I want to be a geographer. I'm interested in everything. And that's always been me, a generalist, that I like lots of different things. And I think that's one of the things I love about running schools, is because, yes, you can get down into the pedagogy and you can really learn about how learners learn and have influence there. But then you could be working through multi-million-dollar budgets. You could be building a new campus, and that ability to have that diverse skill set and to develop that is something that I've absolutely loved. And that skill set then allows you to be quite creative with your thinking and the way that you then problem solve things that come up. And I know that it's easy to say that if I knew then what I know now, I might have done things differently. But this opportunity to have these different experiences in different types of schools has meant that when I come into a new environment, you can leverage from that knowledge. Well, actually, that worked really well in that context. That's not going to work very well here. But if I do that from there and that from there, I know that this is going to be really successful. And so being able to bring new things in and synthesize out what from the learning that you've taken from other environments and pull that all together allows you to do something quite exciting and be even better in your latest position.
Yeah, there's something really powerful in that. So we all know that when we come into a new leadership role, in this case, head of a school, we can't just do what we did in our last school, transplant the success into the new school. We kind of know that. What you're saying is one step well beyond that, multiple steps beyond that. What you're saying is there are contexts. If we can work out the context and the reasons that things were successful in your various different previous experiences, then you've got a better way to weave together a starting idea for your new school. And then it's about figuring out with the people around you, okay, this is a start. Let's give this a go, and then we're going to learn in this context.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
But it's then understanding the people that you've got with you, because it's not just understanding the context in which your school is, it's understanding your new leadership team and all the people that you've got around, and how can you activate the very best of those people and take what your superpowers are and ensure that they're complementary with the other ones that you've got around you, so that you just get the best out of everybody and you're moving forward in a really cohesive manner.
Yeah, I love it. So it's context specific and it's people specific, which of course speaks back to the complexity and the complicated nature of what we're doing.
Absolutely, yes. It's not simple. If there was a magic bullet, we would have found it.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's grubby and grimy and hard work, and you have to do difficult things. Having a conversation with a colleague this week about something that we want to do, I said, well, we could give people the answer, but actually sometimes you don't want to give people the answer, because you want them to go into that learning pit themselves, because as they go through into that to try and work out the answer for themselves, then you go further. And I've always thought you could go from A to B and you could go in a straight line. You can get there quite quickly. But sometimes you have to go and diverge in your path, because you end up going even further. Yeah. And so it's working that out. And I think it's creating that culture where people can make mistakes in a controlled way, take risks, because we actually get far, far better. If you're overly controlling with things, then you can actually stifle that level of creativity and that ability for a school to really sparkle. And I think that's the nub of that good to great journey. If you want to be a good school and you're moving a school into that zone, you may need to set up really clear structures and systems and procedures and be quite precise and regimented with the way that you do things. But then if you want to go from that good to great, you might have to do something a little bit differently. And that improvement journey looks very different.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I noticed when I was looking through your experience before we launched into this conversation was the various different contexts and dimensions and types of schools that you've led in. And I wonder whether, actually there are 5 different areas, 5 dimensions that I noticed difference in your career. And I wondered whether really briefly we could run through those 5 and see whether there are differences in your thinking around to what extent you are controlling and you are determining, to what extent you are really coaching people to allow them to find their wiggly path from A to B that they learn along, but it may not be as straight or as quick as you could see it needs to be. What is it that then enables between these different dimensions a different leadership style that you're bringing? The first of those dimensions, pretty obvious given the conversation we've had so far, is around culture and location. Have you noticed differences when you've led or been within education within the UK, Asia, Middle East? And obviously you will have then had families and staff from all over the world, the entire globe. Is there a difference in the way that you've led in those different cultures, do you think?
I think you definitely have to be adaptable and you have to understand the culture. So, for example, when I worked in Southeast Asia, then there's often a culture of people don't want to lose face and they don't want to let you down. So if you say, is something possible? The answer might be yes. And are you sure? Yes. And it's yes, 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 up until the point when suddenly it is completely impossible. And then there's a potential for you to get quite cross if someone had just told you, look, no, this isn't going to be possible, you could have found a solution from the outset. So I think understanding that nuance, some cultures are a little bit more direct. I find in the Middle East, people are more direct. There's less ambiguity about how people are feeling. And so I think working with that, but I work in international schools with students and staff and parents for up to 70, in one context, 100 different nationalities. And so actually that nuance of understanding the different kinds of people you have in your community, because then you can think about, right, how can I make sure that they are engaged and that they feel part of that, and that we haven't got any group within your community that feels that they're on the fringes. So that knowledge of culture, I think, is really important. And ensuring that you can then get the best out of people.
Yeah, and I imagine it's also different when you're working with an established school. So when you're stepping into a school that has a history, has a culture that's already there, in contrast to a startup or very, very early stages of a school where you have much more kind of a blank sheet of paper to create something. Have you found that's made a difference as well?
Absolutely. And it depends what kind of school you come into. If you come into a very high performing school where it's already got a really well established culture, what it doesn't need is you to lurch in a different direction. But what it needs you to do is to evolve the structure. So evolution, not revolution. There are sometimes you come in when actually a revolution is needed because you're simply not quite good enough. And so you have to lead in a different way. So that might be where you're going in and you are leading the presentations, you are working alongside people to support them and coach them when they're doing presentations, whether it be a staff workshop, a parent workshop, what they're doing in the classroom. And you're setting up those structures so that people know what that bar is. And you say, that's the minimum. Please be better than that. But you're setting that up. When you're in a startup, it's different again, because in many ways, you've got a blank sheet of paper. And my experience of that is that people don't always want a blank sheet of paper. So you have to work out, what is the point? You say, actually, we're just going to do it this way. Here's your framework. Here's your terms of reference. We've got so many things that we can have a blank sheet of paper. We might come back and revisit that, but here are the things that we'll co-create together, and working out what people want to co-create and what people just want, tell me what to do. And yes, we might review it and we might develop it, but you have to be careful on that piece, because if you start and give a framework and say, right, actually we'll do this, we'll work together on co-creating that, but the bit that you give people as the absolute can start to become an embedded part of the history and the structure of the school, and you're landed with it for forevermore. So there is a bit of a responsibility for you there to make sure you get that piece right. And I think having a really good leadership team who you can bounce ideas off and sort of stress test your thought process. I'm a great believer in having a coach, because that coaching process where your coach is just asking these prompts and questions, forcing you to think and articulate your rationale and logic behind something, can help you actually refine and hone your own ideas as well. So all of that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned coaching. I think what you've described is often a coaching style of leadership, and it's for the external opportunity to have that conversation with someone outside as a coach who can also give you a fresh perspective from the outside. It's really interesting that people don't like lots of blank pieces of paper. They generally speaking like structure in which they can then play. And the boundaries and the structure create the safety, if you like, psychological safety, in which people can then get really creative, either as individuals in a classroom or as groups and teams, in creating the way that we're going to do a certain element of the school. But it's really interesting what you said there about the balance between where you create a framework and say this is the way we're doing it, and the risk for a startup is that then gets so baked in that it's never questioned again. And of course the trick there probably being to be able to say with certainty, this is what we're doing, and we will refine. We want to question, we want to see if there are ways to refine what we've said is set in stone. It's not set in stone. It's a structure in which we can play a small amount. Whereas the alternative being this is the area we're going to co-create, there's much less, fewer boundaries already down on the piece of paper, but there's going to be some boundaries, at least a set of values, a set of outcomes that are required. And in that sense, you're saying there's less set in stone, but there's more space, and there's more space to play. But it's almost like a continuum between the two rather than one or the other.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, it's really interesting what you share there.
And it's about understanding the why. I think schools are very good at understanding what we do and how we do it, but actually it's coming back to the why. And you made a good point there, that if you're sure about what your values are and your vision and mission, everything cascades from that.
Yeah.
So if you've got that piece right, and then people are really clear about the why you are doing something, then a lot of these other things come. But if you just give people a framework and they don't understand how it fits in, and almost schools are like a giant piece of Tetris where all of these different parts do link. But sometimes if you don't help people to make those connections and to make those links, then it can all be a little bit messy and a little bit muddly. And the one thing I've learned through my time is that people need that psychological safety. They need to feel that sense of direction and purpose, and that we're all chugging in the same direction, and that they feel supported to grow within that.
I feel conflicted sometimes about the importance of these vision mission statements. I find that they are having a sense of values, of ethos, we might call it a pedagogical kind of philosophy within a school, that is absolutely critical. And simultaneously, I don't really care what it looks like on your website. Like, we're all going to look pretty similar. Like, an excellent school is an excellent school. You can have a bit of a flavour from a different vision or a very different mission statement. But I find myself sometimes slightly uninterested in where people place their focus on what's the external marketing element of this. But I find myself consistently fascinated and drawn back to the importance of that shared set of lived values, a sense of why are we doing this? What do we believe? What do we believe about education that's so powerful that creates a lens through which everything else cascades down and looks, the options available look much more clear when we're looking at it through that lens. It's really interesting.
It's about process, though. And I think sometimes the process of creating your vision statement means that you have to think about what it is that's important to you. Actually, what you come up with the end is kind of less important. But if I went and asked year 3 and then an IB student, would they, in their own age and stage appropriate way, articulate the same thing? Would the parents say it? Would the families? Now, if you're broadly in the same area, you might not use exactly the precise wording, then you're probably in the right place. And that process is part of your journey as a school. And I always say it's a journey, not a destination.
Yeah.
If you think you've got somewhere, that's where you're going to stagnate, and that's where you're going to, drop off and decline as a school. And you've constantly got to be looking forward, and how is it that we can continue to go on that journey and improve. But again, it's pace of the journey. And someone gave me a very good piece of advice many years ago that, Helen, don't forget to turn around and look at where you've come from, because you're so busy sometimes looking forward at how can we be even better. You forget to celebrate the distance traveled. And so that sat with me, and making sure that we do that as a school, I think, is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely critical. I often think about it as the gap and the gain. I think it was a Dan Sullivan book at some point. So the gap being a lot of high performers are driven to look ahead to what is the gap that I'm trying to fill going forwards. And we forget to turn around and look at the gain behind us. And actually, quite often it's our communities, especially communities where there's a whole diverse range of different people. Not everyone is as driven to be forward looking and looking at the gap. But if everyone can occasionally look back and celebrate the gain behind us as a community, that creates the energy, the power, the motivation, the commitment, the coherence to look again forwards, look at the gap, and then try to close it.
But it's the buy-in, isn't it? And when you work in a large school, you've got a lot of staff, you've got a lot of parents, you've got a lot of students. How do you make sure your stakeholders, you're getting that regular feedback and taking that temperature that might be sat on the gate in the morning through to a formal survey, but you're constantly getting that temperature check so you continue moving things forward. And sometimes things can't happen as quickly as people would like. And so it's about managing those expectations. And I do sometimes find it's useful to challenge things, and there are no sacred cows, and you go in and you do a lot of, why do we do that? What do you need to do this? And sometimes people haven't been empowered. You say, well, what do you want me to do to help you make that happen? And they look at you and say, well, it's great, you've just told me why it's really important, so let's do it. What do you need to make that happen? And I see that as one of the wonderful and most enjoyable parts of my job, just empowering people to make things happen, to make things so much better for the young people in our care. Because you are right, we're sending students out into high levels of uncertainty. We
Yeah.
don't know what the world's going to look like. Even in the last few years with AI, it's massively changed the way that we have to think about things. The tools that can help us do our jobs better so we can focus on other things. We don't know what's around the corner. So we need to be developing these young people that are flexible, adaptable, have knowledge and skills that they can work in the complexity of a world that perhaps we don't even know yet.
Yeah.
And so it's exciting and it's a little bit scary as well, but someone's got to do it.
Any journey is exciting, a little bit scary in my book. And if it's not scary, then you're probably not seeing it. You're not seeing something, you're missing something. You're missing something that's an opportunity, or missing something that you could be bolder, more courageous, something that you could step into. If it's too safe, you're not really on the journey yet. I think it's really important, actually. So this complexity, uncertainty, one of the key tools to dealing with complexity and uncertainty as an organization, as a leader, and as an individual, so our young people going out into their careers, is understanding the values we have, the goals we have, what's important, what's not important. It is this sense of vision and mission that gives us the lens through which we can then deal with the uncertainty, the complexity. One of the things that you've led in schools that have been both for-profit and not-for-profit, there are all sorts of assumptions that we might make about the vision or mission of a for-profit or not-for-profit school. But in my experience, they're much more similar on the ground in the way they're run. And it's just a governance shift at the top. Has that been your experience as well? Or have you found that there are differences in the vision and the mission depending on the governance and the kind of for-profit, not-for-profit structure at the top of the school?
Ultimately, I think most educators I've ever worked with care about children and learning. And so on the ground, that will always be the thing that drives you. Now, whether you're in a for-profit or not-for-profit, you still have to balance the books, and you still have stakeholders that you want to do the best by, and you want to make sure that you get good feedback and that you are continuing to improve and develop. So, of course, that's going to be the same. The business model might look a bit different.
Yeah.
And the thing, most of my career, I've worked in not-for-profit, and I love that because everything goes back into the business, which means that everything that comes in can get repurposed into whether it's additional staffing, whether it's additional resourcing, whether it's additional experiences that you can wrap up in the school fees. And so for me, I love that. And I love the opportunity in sort of an independent school or small group of schools where you have that flexibility to flex and develop your own budget. If you work in a bigger group, there's obviously layers of complexity that you need to go through to expand your budget, or if you haven't got budgeted numbers, what does that look like for your budget? So there are differences, but I think you're absolutely right. On the ground, if you've recruited well and you've got people that genuinely care about children and learning, that bit doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well. I think that's because I'm drawn to work with leaders who are very mission driven. And so maybe that's self-selecting in the people that I talk to and work with. But that's been my experience on the ground as well. One of the things that makes a bigger difference maybe is the element of group or multi-campus, depending on how you might frame that, and then either a standalone school or a single campus school. I think there is more of a difference there in the culture sometimes and the way it feels. And I guess it's to some extent, it's the difference going back to what we're talking about, to what extent things are open for creative play as to what it is we co-create together. And then the boundaries, the frameworks that are set outside of us, whether we're middle leaders, senior leaders. Has that felt different for the schools that you've led in as well? Because you've had experience of multi-campus and sort of single campus, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. My previous job, we grew from one larger school with a very small satellite school to 7 campuses around the country. And so you have to think really carefully about how you develop as a leader and how you develop those schools. And the fundamental question starts with, are they going to be very different? You go to some groups where they have totally different curricula and types of schools, or are we going to be seen as one school, many campuses? Now, we took that route, the one school, many campuses, and worked out what the core things were that we were going to be aligned on, what we were going to be the same on. So what are you going to be the same on? What are you going to be aligned on? And where is that area where there may be some flexibility, because you don't want to stifle your leaders either. And my experience was something that you might have an idea and something you want to do as a school is going to look very different in a school of 1,800 to a school of 50. And so how that works. So I learned a lot about that. And I think it's about making sure that you've got those opportunities to bring people together. And in many ways, COVID was good for this, because we were a school around the country and we grew a lot actually during COVID. And so you had to have online meetings because we couldn't get together in person. And so as a group, we were already doing that. So you get all your heads of primary together once a week. You get your heads of secondary together once a week. You get your people across your campuses who are working and setting the strategic plan for learning, for your well-being, for your co-curricular. And so you're constantly bringing people together. And so people are learning from each other in the different contexts within the one group. And as we continued to grow, it was really lovely, because you stopped bringing so many people into the organisation, because you were developing and growing people within that organisation who were then able to step up into those middle and senior leadership roles. So again, it's about looking at, well, what type of group are we? Are we a group of lots of different types of school? Or are we going to be that one school? And what will that look like in practice? And you do have to be quite strategic, and you do have to be quite deliberate in the way that you set things up. And experiences like COVID perhaps derail some of that, because you're trying to manage a crisis as well as develop and evolve those things. And sometimes things are in tension. And probably the two things that are in tension for me are growth and improvement, because you're trying to do two quite different things at the same time, and making sure you've got the systems and structures in place to make sure that that growth, improvement, and the students don't suffer because you're growing, and that you do that in a really carefully, well thought out manner.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because quite often these things that are in tension, so growth and improvement, it's fairly obvious what the tension is. I think most people listening, you can feel that you've had that tension at some point too. And it could be, to some extent, it's true of all businesses. To what extent do we scale? Do we grow? And to what extent do we reinvest in ensuring that the quality of what we're doing is forever improving, and the consistency of what we're doing is forever improving? I think the interesting question comes when, rather than treating it as a polarity in the sense of do we grow or do we improve, that's a false way of describing it. It's actually, how could we improve by growing? How does actually the 100% growth unlock the improvement journey that we want to go in? Or the opposite, how do we improve that then unlocks the growth opportunity that we're seeking? So there's different ways of playing with it. I guess that's what this empowering, coaching, co-creation conversation can do, is to unlock that. Feels like attention to you. Maybe it is, but maybe there's another way of looking at that.
I totally agree. And one of the things when you're growing is that you can bring people into the organisation, and there are economies of scale. So you can suddenly then create a position that if you were a small school, you wouldn't have been able to have. So some of our smaller schools were able to tap into specialist teachers in a way that they wouldn't have been able to tap into, or some level of expertise in operations or facilities that they didn't have previously. And so you can tap into all of those things. And I agree that there isn't always that tension. And so you can bring people in that have that superior skill set, and then we all get better from that. And so I think you're right, that growth can push and drive improvement, as long as you recruit really carefully and do that really well. And I've been privileged in my career to work with some absolutely phenomenal educationalists, and I think bringing those people into your organisation is great, but also creating a network outside of the organisation. And last year, I was fortunate enough to be able to complete the MPQEL qualification. And doing that automatically created a group of 10, 12 people who were doing the same thing. So you could then have those conversations with people. Well, how are you doing that? And you learn from each other. And you create, through those safe spaces, this trusted group of people that you can pick up the phone to and say, I'm grappling with this issue, or some resources that you can tap into that will help you audit or structure. And so it's that constant process of growth, and not seeing yourself as the person that has to find all the solutions, because someone will probably have had the problem before you. So being brave enough just to go and have the conversation and learn from others. And that dialogue is so powerful.
That's the theme that I'm hearing come through our conversation, actually. It's the empowerment of others simultaneously with the sense that you're then creating a network where you can learn from others as well. And that expands well beyond your own school into the networks that you have of other leaders. The final dimension, so the 5 dimensions that I noticed when I was reading through your experience beforehand, we've covered off the culture and location. The second one we had was established schools versus startups. The next one was for-profit, not-for-profit. The fourth one was standalone or single campus and group or multi-campus. The final one, which to some extent as a educator might be the first one we should have thought of, but the final one that occurred to me was actually what happens with the curriculum in the classroom as well. So you've led across IB, A-level, IGCSE, BTECs now as well, I understand, a whole variety of different curricula. Have you noticed any patterns between the way that you're leading? You know, at the very top of the school, you're no longer spending a huge amount of time in the classroom. Does that make a difference to you as a leader, which type of curricula you're delivering in your school, do you think?
I think it's a yes and a no to that.
Yeah.
So, of course, I care, because you want to make sure that the curriculum is best setting students up for the future. But then it comes down to inclusivity. And I really care a lot about inclusive education. When you work in international schools, children arrive in the country, maybe from your home country or from other countries, and they need educating. And it's not their fault their parents are there, and they may have different needs. And everyone's an individual, and there'll be diversity of all types within your community. And it can't be a one size fits all. And so there have to be routes and there have to be pathways. We say, yes, we broadly follow the English national curriculum, which I've done in most of my schools because we're British international schools. But that has to be adapted for the children you have in front of you, and for your local context, and for your international context. And giving students choice in their learning that can connect that learning back to things that have meaning to them and help them make meaning and sense of their world. So that's really important. So then as you get to the upper end of the school, it's about having that diversity of pathways. And I know people say, well, look, it's too expensive, Helen. You can't run multiple pathways. But actually, this year we costed it out, moving from being solely an IB school. What if we did this? Maybe what if we did this and this? And we worked out a plan that we can actually, without increasing our headcount of teachers, be able to increase the number of subjects we offer and offer 2 additional pathways. And so it's about that, being able to be creative and not going, it can't happen. It's about doing it in a different way. Say, how can it happen? And I have a few things that people say, no, that's not possible. Well, how could we make it possible? And when you frame things in that way and start looking at it through a different lens, then suddenly the impossible becomes the possible. And we have so many children, and they're all wonderful individuals. So how can we make sure that every one of them comes away, they want to come to school every day, and that they come away having made progress, whatever their starting point is, and whatever barriers they might have to learning, or whatever differences they have in the way that they want to learn and contribute to the world. And I feel I'm in such a privileged position to be able to create the enabling conditions for that to happen.
Yeah. That question, what if? Such a powerful question. What if we could do the impossible? How would we make that happen? And that idea of how could we make that happen is let's play in the area of talking through what would need to change to make this possible from impossible. And then the final one that I love is what would need to be true for this to be the best option? Because then it gets you to think about the assumptions we're making. And quite often I find when I'm working with a team where there's really entrenched views about the right, in inverted commas, decision or the way forward they want to take, it's because they're making different assumptions about what's actually true. And it's as soon as we can get back to making those assumptions look a little bit more fluid and a little bit less definite, we can start to then play with what would need to be true for that route to be the best one, or what if it was possible for us to do this? Powerful
and I
questions.
think there's two things in there. That first of all, you'll always have someone on your staff that goes, that's a terrible idea, and give you 20 reasons why it's a terrible idea. Brilliant. Get that person involved. Right. These are the 20 reasons. So you just go through the reasons and take all of those reasons off the table. I think that's really powerful, because then suddenly, well, it's not a problem anymore. But also, I think sometimes you want things to be perfect and well formed before you roll them out. But sometimes actually sending something out that's 80 or 90%, because the amount of time you'll spend on trying to get the final 10% right is not going to be good use of your time, because actually you send it out into the world as an infant that needs a little bit of nurture and care, and everyone else will help you do that 10% really quickly, because they'll do it far better than you, stuck in your room. And actually then everyone takes ownership of it and buys into it, and it's so much better than something you could have come up with. So a little bit of imperfection can actually go a very long way.
Absolutely. And I would probably say, with the increasing levels of complexity and certainty that we're generally leading through, the chance that you hit the final 5 or 10% and actually deliver something perfect is pretty small. Let's be really honest. So actually, you've got to put it out there unfinished, and then allow others to finish it, because actually, even if you think you're putting it out there finished, you're going to get too attached to it, and then you're going to discover that actually it needs to shift and change anyway. That's been my experience anyway.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And people will come up with better ideas than you do. And so just putting it out there is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a suspicion that we could continue for the next 3 hours, Helen. I'm not sure that you or I have the time in our diary to do that, unfortunately. Maybe we'll continue the conversation some other time. But today we're going to wrap up our conversation. What I'd like to ask you as a final question is, as people are going away from this, having listened to this conversation, what's the one idea you'd like to invite people to really hold and explore in their own leadership?
Don't think you have all of the answers, and embrace people around you. I think it could be quite easy to come in and go, right, this is what I want to do. This is how I'm going to do it. And I've learned most from the people that do it in an entirely chaotic, sometimes, or different way to how you would have done it. And you go, I didn't think about doing it that way, but what a brilliant idea. And we're so much better from that. And I think embracing the idea that sometimes we're just simply going to get it wrong, and being able to say, hands up, I got that very wrong. Here's what we're going to do to put that right and to move it forward. And I think if you can go in being a little bit humble and open to what's around you, you will go so much further, and your schools will thrive. But you have to underpin that with the idea that there will be things that are your red lines, because ultimately you've got those children in your care. And if you get that vision and mission piece right, and you know what you stand for, then everything else around that will come.
Beautiful. I love it. And it's all a balancing act at the end of the day, isn't it? Balancing those things that feel like tensions, balancing those assumptions that we may not have seen in our own thinking yet. Helen, thank you so much for sharing the time with us today. It's been a delight to be talking to you about these ideas. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And you've helped me because by articulating my own thinking, it helps me consolidate my thinking as well. So I absolutely love the conversation today. So thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Independent School Podcast. If you found today's conversation valuable, I invite you to join my email list and hear more of my fresh thinking on leading strategically through complexity and uncertainty. Visit www.consultjuliet.co.uk/sign up. Remember, the biggest challenges you face are rarely solved by working harder. They're solved by thinking differently, with the right trusted advisor in your corner. While I work with leaders across many sectors, my heart and more than 2 decades of experience remain deeply rooted in education. If you're ready to turn complexity into progress, sharpen your focus, and lead a happier, higher performing team, I'd love to start a conversation about how we could work together. Just reach out anytime. And don't forget, the clearest insights often appear when you gift yourself a moment to slow down and let your best thinking surface.